Of course you would do that. Hey Shade, what you doing? Just playing some Pokemon. Really? Do you do competitive? That you like Pokemon? Do we actually have similar interests? I guess so! And I bet we can both agree on the best gen. Obviously. Gen 3. Gen 5. Sup people, Shiny Piece here, and welcome back to Annoying Bitches at Annoying Things. Pokemon is a franchise that I'm sure you've either played or have at least heard of. It's a role-play video game franchise that's been going on for more than 20 years, growing a large following because of its addicting gameplay, unique designs, and interesting characters. Believe it or not, there was a time when these games were good! You know, back when they actually cared about being fun instead of blowing off their money on their pretty graphics. Each game takes place in a world where dangerous creatures known as pocket monsters, Pokemon for short, are captured in balls to use for battling in sport. In every game, the player is on a quest to build one of the strongest teams of Pokemon to defeat the Elite Four, who are considered the strongest trainers in their world, and become the Pokemon League champion. Oh, and there's also something about evil organizations that usually focus on world domination, but that's not important. As a kid, I always loved these games, however, I was really bad at them. I would make a team based off of Pokemon that I thought looked cute or cool and just tossed myself at everything until I won due to being overleveled. When I stopped viewing this series as a cute collectathon and more as games of strategy, I began to enjoy it more than I already had. I started coming up with strategies for each monster on my team and found out that I like playing like an asshole with confusion and toxic stalling. I still remember the first Pokemon game I ever played, Leaf Green version, a fantastic remake of Blue version that kept the overall story and spirit, adding in features that made the experience better. I wouldn't have had any interest in Leaf Green if I hadn't seen the anime adaptation when I was a child. Pokemon was my, and others' first anime, and is what helped me get into anime as a whole, as well as the game series that I now currently love. In the past, I've said that I enjoy the anime and have expressed other opinions about it involving its characters. However, that was a really long time ago, back when I was an embarrassing 14-year-old. Recently, I've been thinking, is it as good as I remember? Looking back on it, not really. Season 1 of the Pokemon anime, which I'll just be referring to as Indigo League, actually has a pretty great start. The first 10 episodes give the impression that it'll stay faithful to its source material while also being its own thing and making some changes that will work for the better. Then as it goes on, it seems to give up on being at all accurate to the game, substituting interesting story arcs for mind-boggling, endless filler. When I was a kid, I would watch this show in the English dub. Nowadays, whenever I watch anime, I prefer to watch it in Japanese. Considering Pokemon is one of the more popular kids anime, you'd think it wouldn't be so hard to find every episode subbed, but for whatever reason, it is, so I had to swap between the sub and dub every now and then. Because of that, expect to hear the audio jump from English to Japanese. For the sake of making sure no one's confused, I'll be referring to the characters by their English names throughout this video. The plot, for the most part, is the same as it was in the games. Ignorant, stupid child is for some reason allowed to wander into the wilderness alone where he could very much be killed by dangerous superpowered animals while having to fight an evil organization. While they keep the basic format, they make a lot of changes to the characters and the direction the story goes in. The differences from the show and the game spawned the creation of the Zensho manga and another game, Pokemon Yellow version, which were released a year after the show's debut. The main character of Gen 1, Red, has been replaced by competitive Ash Ketchum, voiced by Rika Matsumoto in Japanese and Veronica Taylor in English. In the games, the player would have to pick between Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle before starting their journey to make sure they could catch Pokemon or just protect themselves. In the anime, instead of getting one of the 3 starters due to sleeping in late on the morning they're being handed out, Ash receives a Pikachu, which ends up being his partner and best friend throughout the game. At first glance, this change is a bit stupid, but I don't mind it as Ash ends up getting all 3 of the starters later on anyway, but I'll talk more about them in a bit. Red is a silent protagonist meant to be a blank sheet for the player to insert themselves in, and there isn't much to him until Gold and Silver, the second season of entries in the games. Ash is the complete opposite of a silent protagonist, and he has much more personality than a blank sheet. We're all familiar with Veronica Taylor's Ash, but honestly, I can't think of a more perfect voice actress for him other than Rika Matsumoto. She really captures the energy and heart that the character should have.
モンスターボールの中ってポケモンにはすごく気持ちいい世界なんだろう。
Ash is probably the biggest example of how the 4Kids dub changed the show. Lines that are just him asking a question or saying something cute are replaced with him being either loud, obnoxious, or overall stupid in the dub.
Look at that! Pikachu feels like dancing!
Moral of the story? Fuck dubs! I'm not saying that I think he's anything amazing in the Japanese version, but he's what I would expect them using as a fill-in for Red. He has a good heart, is willing to go to insane extents to protect others he cares about, but is a bit dumb and can be arrogant and reckless at times. He can be fun to watch and has all of the typical flaws you'd expect a 10-year-old boy to have. Ash isn't the best protagonist, but he's a decent main character that plays off of the supporting cast pretty well. Moving on to the main mascot, whom I will admit I have a bit of a bias towards since Raichu was and is my favorite Gen 1 Mon, Pikachu kinda goes through a character 360. In the first episode, he's very moody and overconfident with a pretty large hatred for our MC.
Pikachu, yoroshiku! Pika.
However, when Ash protects him from a flock of Spearow, he begins to respect and love him, leading to him becoming sort of the voice of reason on Ash's final team. One thing Ash and Red have in common is that they both have a rival throughout their stories. Unlike Ash, who's quite different from his game counterpart, Gary is pretty much a direct clone of Blue. Also, yes, that is Gary's Japanese voice. That took a lot of getting used to. Red and Blue have a strong rivalry since the moment they both get their starters. There's always a strong tension between them, as no matter how strong Red seems to be, Blue's always one step ahead of him, to the point where his final fight with Red is as the Pokemon League champion. It's a great rivalry that's fun to watch until the final battle. Is this interesting dynamic displayed in the show? Nope! Instead, there's barely any conflict between Ash and Gary. Gary's barely in it at all, in fact, and when he rarely ever does show up, there's almost no tension between him and Ash. They don't even fight each other until Orange Islands. Now you're probably thinking, if Gary's not an appropriate rival, what do they do for the Elite Four? Ha ha ha! I am going to rip that shit apart when we get there! Team Rocket also went through several changes. In the games, they're your typical bad guys that make a living off of stealing and selling Pokemon. Their schemes just so happen to take place in almost every town and city the player visits. Being the good boy that Red is, he stops every single one of their attempts at thievery and turns into a nuisance for them throughout the game. In the show, the main threat is a duo of blundering oafs that have a talking Meowth for some reason. When they first show up, it's similar to how it is in the games, where they try to steal from a place the MC coincidentally happens to be. Only instead of happening at Mount Moon, they're introduced very early on in Vermilion City in the second episode. When they see how strong Pikachu is, they decide to make him their main target. From then on, they become the comic relief villains that come up with ridiculously stupid plans that never work out. At first, I was a bit skeptical that these three were our villains and a bit confused as to why they don't dress in black. But later on, you see other Team Rocket grunts that do dress in black, and it's kind of implied that the main three we follow are lower-ranked grunts. There's even a dark shadow over Giovanni's face for the first several times we see him, hinting that there's a larger, more competent threat behind the comic relief just waiting for the climax. Even though the only small payoff to Giovanni is in the movies, which aren't even canon, and later on they show his face as if it was never hidden at all, so... oops! The main reason I don't mind this change to Team Rocket is that they are fucking funny.
我がロケット団の世界征服のためにも強いポケモンは増やしとくべきじゃないか。ピカチュウ一匹捕まえられんと偉そうに。
Seriously, why the hell are they so entertaining? The conflict with the Team Rocket grunts is essentially the entire plot to Red and Blue, as Pokemon didn't get that story-heavy until Ruby and Sapphire. Since Team Rocket went through many changes, Indigo League doesn't really have a story, and each episode is self-contained, save for multi-parter episodes. This is where I start having problems with the show. There's never any consistency with how much filler there will be in between gym badges. Sometimes there will be 2 kind of fun filler episodes before getting a gym badge, and then other times there will be a block of filler to the point where it gets boring and you're just praying for the gym badge. However, when we do get to the gym battles, most of the time it's terrible. Yeah, 8 of the most important fights in the game are the worst parts of the anime. The first 2 leaders of Gen 1, Brock and Misty, Ash never even finishes his fights with. For Brock, the only reason he gets the gym badge was that he apparently inspired him with his determination. For Misty, he stops a Team Rocket invasion, which makes her sisters just give him the badge as a thank you. Not exactly a satisfying payoff. Brock and Misty become his companions throughout the show, being sort of mentors to him. Despite the fact that they're former gym leaders, no one ever seems to recognize them, and honestly, aside from their gym episodes, you could swap them out with any characters and it would make very little difference. Although, I will admit, returning to this show as a single teenager makes it very easy to relate to Brock.
緑さん。
え？
不思議種の代わりに、俺がこの村に残ろうかと。
でも、ここは私一人で大丈夫。
あ、そうですか。
I feel ya, man. I feel ya. Ash getting the gym badge despite not beating the gym leader is going to be a recurring thing, by the way. There are 2 ways Ash ends up getting a gym badge. Either he wins it in honest after a dilemma of some sorts, usually caused by Team Rocket, keeps him from fighting the gym leader for the first time, or he ends up using the power of friendship, and that's enough to get a badge. The most insulting example of him not earning a gym badge is in Pokemon Sensation against Erica. I hate this episode for multiple reasons. Actually, no, just one. Everyone is an idiotic asshole. In this episode, Ash made the grave sin of being a 10-year-old boy who doesn't like perfume, something inherently seen as girly, so he's denied access into Erica's gym. To get in, he stupidly lets himself get manipulated by Team Rocket, who only want to get Erica's perfume for no reason, and big shock, Team Rocket end up causing a ruckus and start a fire. Ash saves Erica's gloom that got trapped inside, earning him the badge. So, in other words, he got the badge by fixing a shitfest that he essentially started because he wasn't allowed in for not liking something most young boys don't like. We are gathered here today to mourn the death of a loved one. An example of how Ash fairly gets a gym badge is with the fight against Lieutenant Surge. A lot of people say that the episode with Surge's gym fight, Electric Shock Showdown, is one of the best episodes of Season 1. I remember really liking that episode when I was younger, so for the longest time, I agreed. Watching it again, I can't say I do anymore. Lieutenant Surge is my favorite character in Gen 1. He's a strong, strict soldier that fought in a war and was saved by his strong electric Pokemon. What war this was is never explained, but it's an interesting background, making Surge one of the more interesting characters of the first generation. He even saved the life of one of the trainers in his gym, earning him more respect than any gym leader in Kanto has. He's like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of Pokemon.
Right? Wrong.
So guess how this insanely interesting and badass character is represented in the anime? He's downgraded to a pure bully archetype with no interesting backstory.
Hey, look! Baby no Pokemon wa yappari baby da ze.
Yep. A once respectful, badass, hot as hell motherfucker is now a pee-pee poo-poo big meanie pants. I get he's kind of rude in the games, but he's never a full-on dick who actually makes fun of people. Lieutenant Surge in Indigo League is meant to be the supposed opposite of Ash if he were to ever evolve his Pikachu immediately. He even says this.
ポケモンマスターを目指すんなら、ゲットしたその日にさっさと進化させるもんだぜ。
Which is really bad advice. Pokemon that evolve with stones have a certain gimmick that makes them stop learning moves once they evolve. In Gen 1 games, Pikachu can learn useful moves as it levels up, such as Swift, which is a move that never misses, and Thunder, the strongest electric move for the type at the time. You're a fucking gym leader, so you should know this stuff. It's also a bit hypocritical, you know, since you have a Pikachu. Why can't you give actual good, insightful advice like you do in the Gen 3 remakes? What true words of genius. Did you also know that Pokemon level up and evolve? The strong part of this episode is when instead of evolving Pikachu and using brute force, Ash uses Pikachu's move Agility to dodge all of Raichu's moves and exhaust its PP. PP, leaving it vulnerable, which is pretty great as they rarely use actual strategy throughout the rest of the show. It's a good idea for Ash to learn how to use brains over brawn, but I just don't think Surge was the best character for it. I do get why a lot of people like this episode, as it's one of the few occasions where Ash actually deserves the gym badge and when the characters use actual strategy, but it completely butchered my favorite character, downgrading him to a one-dimensional idiot. Another noteworthy example of Ash getting the gym badge without deserving it is the fight against Sabrina, which was a 3-parter. I must say, these episodes were an even bigger disappointment than Electric Shock Showdown, because the first 2 episodes gave me so much hope that the payoff would turn out to be good. The first episode, Abra and the Psychic Showdown, was great. It set up Sabrina as a psychopath who would use a doll to talk and shrink her characters to fit in a toy box to torment them. The main trio end up being saved by a stranger, who we later find out is Sabrina's father, and his explanation for defeating Sabrina is so stupid. No, really, this was bugging me even when I was a kid.
Only one other type of Pokemon can battle the Psychic type. If you capture a ghost Pokemon from Lavender Town, you might have a chance.
Hey, buddy, come here. You listening? You listening? Okay. The only ghost types in this gen are part poison, which is weak to Psychic, and while Ghost deals super effective damage to Psychic, it doesn't resist it, so even if you catch a ghost type, you're still screwed. So in the next episode, Ash goes to Lavender Town to catch a ghost type. Since they're not going with the Team Rocket invasion that was in the games, and thus not showing the ghost of Cubone's mother, I'm sure they won't attempt anything dark.
俺たち幽体離脱しちゃったんだ。やだよ、まだ死にたくないってば。
Nintendo, do you just want to scar your audience? A Haunter ends up being amused by Ash and follows him to fight Sabrina. Then comes the insulting part. Ash gets the gym badge because Haunter made her laugh. Meanwhile, I'm getting sweeped by her stupid Kadabra! Do I need to explain why I hate these episodes? Oh, and Ash doesn't even keep the Haunter. You moron. The last gym leader I want to talk about is the final one, but I'll talk about him when I get into spoiler territory. What gives Pokemon its lasting appeal to most people is, well, the Pokemon. It's kinda hard for me to say that since most of the mons that I care about don't exist until Gens 3 and 5. I said earlier that the show has a lot of filler episodes, most of which are centered around almost every Pokemon and their different capabilities. I would like to talk about all of them, but this video is long enough, so I'll only give 2 examples of how it's done right and wrong with my 2 favorite starters of this generation. In 3 episodes in a row, Ash catches all of the main starters, Charmander, Bulbasaur, and Squirtle, obviously for marketing purposes, so I don't mind it that much. The one that I think got the best representation of the 3 was Bulbasaur, which is lucky for me since Ivysaur is my favorite of the Gen 1 starters. Bulbasaur in Indigo League is introduced as a protective guardian over a small community of weak Pokemon being cared for by a girl named Melanie. When he sees how strong of a trainer Ash is, he battles against Pikachu to decide if he'll be on Ash's team or not, which is pretty well written and fun to watch. Bulbasaur even ends up becoming a strong team member for Ash that's similar to Pikachu in that he's sort of a voice of reason, although he's a bit more hasty than Pikachu. Then a crap example of the show's portrayal of Pokemon is with everyone's favorite Fire Lizard. Oh boy, I hated the Charmander line when I was a kid, and rewatching the show, I remember why. Charmander is introduced waiting for his previous owner who abandoned him at a rock, thinking he was too weak. He even stays out in a rainstorm enduring attacks by Spearow. Ash ends up saving his life, and when Charmander finds out the true intentions of his previous owner, he ends up happily joining Ash's team. Considering the fact that Ash went through a rainstorm against a flock of violent Spearows to save Charmander's life, you'd think he'd be forever appreciative towards him, right? Well, he was at first, but then when he evolved into Charmeleon, he for some reason became extremely hostile and violent towards Ash, which got even worse when he evolved into Charizard.
Looks like the only reason Charizard evolved was to battle Aerodactyl.
As a kid, I watched this show for the Pokemon, obviously, but my favorite character was Ash, and big shock, I didn't like seeing him getting his face charred when he didn't deserve it. Because of this poor representation in the anime, I hated Charizard for the longest time, which is a shame because it really is a good Pokemon. Even without the bias I had towards Ash when I was younger, I still hate the fact that Charizard has no appreciation towards the kid who saved his life just because he thinks he's so high and mighty. It's like they were trying to encourage people to hate him. And the payoff. Oh, the payoff to their relationship. I am going to rip that shit apart. Just FYI, I couldn't find the Japanese episodes for any of the episodes I'll be talking about, so from this point on, I'll just be using the dub audio.
Why did you do that to my Togepi? Misty, it was an accident. Huh? Get it? Egg?
Now I remember why I hate watching dubs. Indigo League has been pretty stupid and tedious at times, but for the most part, it's been pretty harmless with some entertainment value to be found. Then we get to the episode Battle of the Badge, where the show completely loses whatever little charm it had left and becomes brain-dead crap. Battle of the Badge is the first time we see Giovanni's face, and it's when he reveals that he has an incredibly strong, anonymous Pokemon up his sleeve. These scenes coincide with scenes from the first movie, which, as far as I can tell, isn't canon. But even if it was, I won't be talking about it, as that could be reserved for its separate video. So now that we finally see there's a bigger threat to Team Rocket than just the comic relief villains, and that he has an ace that supposedly no one can defeat, guess what they do next? Instead of fighting Giovanni and his strong ace, Ash instead fights the comic relief villains who he beats on a daily basis. Team Rocket doesn't disband at this point, Ash doesn't overcome any obstacle that he hasn't already, and everything was stupid. I fucking hate this episode. Indigo League doesn't have our MC fight the Elite Foreign Champion. Instead, they have a bullshit system that decides randomly who the contestants will be fighting in the league tournament. Seriously, they made it way more complicated than they needed.
You don't start out in the Indigo Stadium. At the Indigo Plateau Conference of Pokemon League, they use 4 different battlefields: rock, grass, water, and ice. You have to win your matches on all 4 battlefields before you can battle in the Indigo Stadium.
Why? Why even? Walk in, fight 4 strong trainers, fight the champion, prove once and for all that you're better than your rival, be the very best like no one ever was. What is so wrong with that? Anyway, the first few fights Ash wins in the league aren't that bad, but then we get to what they do for the rival. Since Gary has been completely worthless and forgettable this entire show, they had to introduce another character to basically fill in his role for Ash's rival fight, Ash 2.0. Yeah, he has a name, but I'm just gonna call him Ash 2.0 because that's basically who he is. Ash 2.0 is introduced near the final, and he and Ash just have, oh, so much in common. Almost as if they're the exact same fucking character. He even has every single Pokemon Ash has used in the show on his team, including a little Pikachu that has its own original haircut. Did this kid just predict DeviantArt? You wanna know the insulting bit? Like the ultimate middle finger of this season? Ash loses to this twat, all because Charizard didn't listen to him.
Charizard, you can't just quit in the middle of my most important match ever! Just listen to me now and you'll never have to listen to me again, okay?
Alright, you piece of shit. Ash fucking saved your life and has been more than patient with you since you decided to stop giving a fuck. The least you can do is help him beat this recolor so we don't have to sit through another 20 years of the exact same crap! Because Ash lost the Indigo League, he of course can't journey to Mount Silver, so they had to make a lot of changes to the adaptation of Gen 2 known as Johto Journeys. Now, I'm not saying that with all of the changes they made to Gen 1, Johto Journeys would end up being bad. In fact, with the changes that they made, I think they had the potential to make it better. When Team Rocket is trying to work to please their former boss Giovanni, you already had developed grunts that we got to see originally, and you could have used them as fill-ins for the admins as they didn't get real characters until the Gen 4 remakes. When Gold is traveling through Kanto, you could have the gym leaders and other characters be reminded of the mysterious trainer who originally defeated all of them, particularly with Brock and Misty. Hell, if we were to see Ash at the top of Mount Silver instead of Red, it would be much more impactful. We've seen this character before, we know the struggles he had to go through, and seeing a once energetic kid turned into a silent badass would actually make older viewers feel proud of him, and make Gold's win feel much more deserved. Instead, Ash also acts as a fill-in for Gold, and Brock and Misty follow him through the Johto region, repeating essentially what we saw in Kanto. Now, you're probably asking, why talk about Johto Journeys now? Shouldn't that be reserved for another review? Well, the thing is, that's pretty much all I can say about Johto Journeys. Considering the heavy changes they made to Gen 1, they had no choice but to make Gen 2 its own thing, and they don't even attempt to adapt its story. As its own thing, it's alright. It's got some memorable moments and a lot of fun episodes, but it's not worth making a separate video over. Overall, there are two ways you can look at Pokemon Indigo League, either as an adaptation or as a standalone kids anime. As an adaptation, it's pretty bad. It makes some changes to the games that will be insanely clever, but for every good episodes, there's 20 bad ones that put in ridiculous changes that make you wonder what they were thinking. As a standalone kids anime, it's fairly decent and harmless. It's pretty corny, but has enough memorable moments and a nice cast of characters that will probably entertain your kids. With that out of the way, I have to admit, I can't bring myself to at all dislike the Pokemon anime. If I'd never seen it, I wouldn't have played the games, and I wouldn't have found out that I love them to death. If I had never seen it, I wouldn't have gotten into anime as a whole, and I probably wouldn't be making reviews right now. Hell, before I got my YouTube account, I always watched a lot of videos about the franchise, which is what inspired me to make videos in the first place. So, in a way, if it weren't for the Pokemon anime, I wouldn't be doing all of the stuff that I like doing right now. Because of that, I can't bring myself to dislike it, and I have to appreciate it. Do I still think it's the masterpiece that my child self thought? No, but it's something I'll turn on every now and then and think, child me was stupid for liking this crap, and current me is just as stupid. With that, I'm out.